1, 2, 1, 2.
Some of you may be surprised to hear this, but I'm not making this video to say that Judge Kavanaugh is definitely an attempted rapist, and I'm not making this video to say that Dr. Ford is absolutely telling the truth in her allegations. Despite what some on the right might say, I am also not making this video out of some supposed liberal dogma to believe all women no matter what. I am making this video because I think that many things need to be set straight about the Kavanaugh controversy. Dr. Ford's allegations towards Kavanaugh involve events that happened decades ago, and Ford's delivery of her testimony, as well as Kavanaugh's delivery of his denial, were both very impassioned and understandably so. Ford acted like a genuine victim recalling a traumatic event, and Kavanaugh acted like a person who was falsely accused of committing a horrible act. With only testimony to go off of, who are we to believe? Indeed, according to the polls, whether you agree with Ford or Kavanaugh almost entirely depends on your politics, with Democrats believing Ford and Republicans believing Kavanaugh in nearly equal proportions. As for me, in a situation like this, I think it is appropriate to simply withhold belief. I neither believe Ford nor Kavanaugh, and I do not disbelieve either one of them either. However, that brings me to the point of this video. We don't have to believe Ford's testimony to be able to objectively say that Kavanaugh was dishonest, evasive, and increasingly difficult to believe as the hearings went on. That is the point of this video. Kavanaugh's congressional hearing was not a criminal trial, it was a job interview. What that means is that despite what some will say, we are not here to argue whether or not Kavanaugh is a criminal, but whether or not he is credible enough to hold a position on the highest court in the US. With that said, let's begin.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce.
There are two problematic oversights in Kavanaugh's testimony that I want to go through. The first may seem minor, but it is important. One of the holes in Ford's story is that her friend Leland Kaiser, who was alleged to also be at the meeting where this happened, does not recall the event in question. It's understandable then that Kavanaugh would seize on this detail as part of his defense. Kavanaugh did mention this correctly once.
All 4 people allegedly at the event, including Dr. Ford's longtime friend, Ms. Kaiser, have said they recall no such event.
However, Kavanaugh goes one step further and ends up twisting the facts in his favor.
And indeed, it is refuted by the people allegedly there.
Let me talk.
The core of why we're here is an allegation for which the 4 witnesses present have all said it didn't happen.
Saying that you do not remember an event is not the same thing as saying that the event never happened. In fact, at the time, Leland Kaiser was on the record saying that she believes Ford's allegation. Kavanaugh is a federal judge. Before his nomination to the Supreme Court, he had a very long career in very high positions of authority.
For the past 12 years leading up to my nomination for this job, I've served in a very public arena as a federal judge on what is often referred to as the second most important court in the country. I've handled some of the most significant and sensitive cases affecting the lives and liberties of the American people. I have been a good judge.
Kavanaugh should be sharp enough to understand the difference between not remembering an event and denying an event happened. But perhaps you could argue that this is just an honest misunderstanding, that this lapse of judgment just occurred because Kavanaugh is under so much stress from having his character impugned. However, this oversight has the effect of being more unfavorable to Ford and helping Kavanaugh. Saying that all the witnesses there say it never happened comes across much more favorable to Kavanaugh than just saying all the witnesses don't remember it and one of them believes Ford, which is the truth. Again, this mistake does not prove that Kavanaugh is guilty of sexual assault, but it is the first indication of him twisting the evidence to help his case. More seriously, there is one piece of evidence that marginally corroborates Ford's testimony: Kavanaugh's calendars.
Dr. Ford has no evidence, none. Meanwhile, I've got these. I've got these calendars. These beautiful, creepy calendars.
During his opening statement, Kavanaugh produced calendars he kept from the summer of 1982, which is when Ford alleges the attack happened.
I never attended a gathering like the one Dr. Ford describes in her allegation.
Let's hear Ford's description of what this gathering was like.
One evening that summer, after a day of diving at the club, I attended a small gathering at a house in the Bethesda area. There were 4 boys I remember specifically being at the house: Brett Kavanaugh, Mark Judge, a boy named PJ, and one other boy whose name I cannot recall. When I got to the small gathering, people were drinking beer in a small living room, family room type area on the first floor of the house.
It was not pointed out at any time during the hearings, but upon closer inspection, it has been noticed that there is at least one entry from the summer of 1982 that closely matches Ford's description, July 1st. It is a small gathering with at least 3 of the 4 people Ford remembers: Judge, Kavanaugh, and PJ. And of course, there were the skis or brewskis, referring to beer. Again, this doesn't mean that Kavanaugh is guilty, and it doesn't mean that everything that Dr. Ford alleges is true, but it is an indication of Kavanaugh's dishonesty. Why? Because Kavanaugh, as part of his testimony, went over in detail many events on his calendar that did not match Ford's description.
The only weekend nights that I was in D.C. were Friday, June 4, when I was with my dad at a pro golf tournament. I also was in D.C. on Saturday night, August 7th, but I was at a small gathering at Becky's house in Rockville with Matt, Denise, Lori, and Jenny. And then on the weekend of August 20 to 22nd, I was staying at the Garretts with Pat and Chris as we did final preparations for football training camp that began on Sunday the 22nd. As the calendars confirm, that weekend before a brutal football training camp schedule was no time for parties. So let me emphasize this point. If the party described by Dr. Ford happened in the summer of 1982 on a weekend night, my calendar shows all but definitively that I was not there.
Kavanaugh took his time and read aloud the details of many events, all as examples that do not match Ford's description, and even goes on to say this.
The event described by Dr. Ford presumably happened on a weekend.
Kavanaugh brings up details of several dates, none of which are in July. Then he goes out of his way to say that it must have been on a weekend, multiple times.
It's an outrage that I was not allowed to come and immediately defend my name and say, I didn't do this, and give you all this evidence. I'm not even in D.C. on the weekends in the summer of 1982. This happened on a weekday? Well, when I'm not at a Blair High School for a summer league game? I'm not at Tobin's house working out? I'm not at a movie with Suzanne?
Let's think about this from Kavanaugh's perspective for a second. In preparing his statement, Kavanaugh went through the entire summer of 1982 on his calendar. In his statement, he read aloud details from multiple days, from June and August, completely skipping over July. Then he spends time talking about how it must have been a weekend and then listing the things he did on weekends. Again, none of which are in July. Are we supposed to believe that Kavanaugh just so happened to skip over all of July while preparing his statement on accident, and skipped over all of the get-togethers on weekdays on accident? By skipping over July and directing everyone's attention to weekends, the July 1st date, which is a Thursday, is conveniently never mentioned. In fact, the closest we get to any mention of July 1st was this.
Judge, do you still have your calendars there?
I do.
I would like you to look at the July 1st entry.
Yes.
The entry says, and I quote, "Go to Timmy's for skis with Judge, Tom, PJ, Bernie, and Squee."
Squee. It's a nickname.
Okay. To what does this refer and to whom? Have you reviewed every entry that is in these calendars of May, June, July, and August of 1982?
I have.
Is there anything that could even remotely fit what we're talking about in terms of Dr. Ford's allegations?
No.
I think to any reasonable person, the July 1st date qualifies as at least being remotely close to Ford's description, but Kavanaugh says no to the question anyway. During the entire hearing, no one mentioned the similarities between July 1st and Ford's description. Of course, there is no definitive proof that July 1st is in fact the date of the alleged assault, but during Ford's testimony, we were given a small detail that actually allows us to corroborate Ford's story.
Yes, I was going to the Potomac Village Safeway. This is the one on the corner of Falls and River Road. And I was with my mother, and I was a teenager, so I wanted her to go in one door and me go in the other. So I chose the wrong door because the door I chose was the one where Mark Judge was, looked like he was working there and arranging the shopping carts. And I said hello to him. And his face was white and very uncomfortable saying hello back. And we had previously been friendly at the times that we saw each other over the previous 2 years, albeit not very many times. We had always been friendly with one another. I wouldn't characterize him as not friendly. He was just nervous and not really wanting to speak with me. And he looked a little bit ill.
How long did this occur after the incident?
I would estimate 6 to 8 weeks.
This is an important detail because this is part of Ford's testimony that can be corroborated. Mark Judge, a close friend of Kavanaugh's, published a book about surviving alcoholism. In one chapter, he wrote that in the summer before his senior year, which would be 1982, he worked at a local grocery store to raise money for football camp. In his book, it's written, "Of course, alcoholics also get into all kinds of trouble because of their drinking. When they supersede their own tolerance, they suffer catastrophic hangovers. These can make getting through the day an Olympic event. This was never more evident to me when, to raise money for football camp, I spent a few weeks working as a bag boy at the local supermarket. My job was simple. People would leave their grocery baskets against a rail in front of the store, then pull their cars around. I would then sling their groceries in the car, sometimes get a small tip, then wait for the next car. It was a nightmare. Invariably, I would be hungover, or still drunk, when I got to work at 7 in the morning, and I spent most of the first hour just trying to hold myself together. I'd stopped eating breakfast a year earlier, so I didn't have to worry about trying to keep food down after a bender, but sometimes I was so toxic from the alcohol that I would have the dry heaves. Luckily, the bathroom was a private room in the back of the store, and I often managed to recuperate there unnoticed. Or I would sneak into the patch of woods behind the store and rest for an hour, usually getting back before anyone noticed." Now, the timing of this football camp just so happens to also be in the calendars that Kavanaugh provided. First, let's look at the timing. Ford said that she saw Judge about 6 to 8 weeks after the assault. Football camp began on August 22nd, a little under 8 weeks after the July 1st date in question. The time frame that Judge gave for working at a grocery store is consistent with the time frame that Ford gave for running into him at the Safeway. Second, there's this detail.
And he looked a little bit ill.
Judge being drunk, hungover, and barely keeping himself from vomiting would very much explain why he looked ill when Ford saw him. Recall that this is not a criminal trial but a job interview. The reason why Ford's sexual assault allegation is so important is because we are evaluating the character of somebody who is going to occupy a very important position in our government. At the time of the hearings, there were debates that people had over whether or not a sexual assault that someone committed when they were very young should be held against them for the rest of their life. Even if the alleged sexual assault was just a one-time mistake committed while extremely drunk, the allegation implies something: that Kavanaugh may have serious issues with alcohol, that he regularly drinks too much and is belligerent when he's drunk. In fact, in 3 out of the 4 accusations against Kavanaugh during the hearings, Kavanaugh being drunk was a common theme in all of them. That's why Kavanaugh made his character a major topic during his testimony, portraying himself as a good student and a young man of faith who respected girls, even if he did like a beer or two every now and then.
Dr. Ford's allegation is radically inconsistent with my record and my character from my youth to the present day. As students at an all-boys Catholic Jesuit school, many of us became friends and remain friends to this day with students at local Catholic all-girls schools. One feature of my life that has remained true to the present day is that I've always had a lot of close female friends. I'm not talking about girlfriends. I'm talking about friends who are women. That started in high school. Maybe it was because I'm an only child and had no sisters. But anyway, we had no social media or text or email, and we talked on the phone. I remember talking almost every night, it seemed, to my friends Amy or Julie. Or Kristen, or Karen, or Suzanne, or Maura, or Megan or Nikki. I never had sexual intercourse or anything close to it during high school or for many years after that. In some crowds, I was probably a little outwardly shy about my inexperience. Tried to hide that. At the same time, I was also inwardly proud of it. For me and the girls who I was friends with, that lack of major or rampant sexual activity in high school was a matter of faith and respect and caution.
With regards to the beer, take note of the fact that Kavanaugh told what some might consider to be a white lie.
The drinking age was 18 in Maryland for most of my time in high school and was 18 in D.C. for all of my time in high school. I drank beer with my friends.
Kavanaugh, during the summer of 1982, was 17, so drinking then would be underage drinking. Let me be clear, I don't care that he had some beers while he was 17 and not 18. I really don't care that he drank underage, and I don't think anyone else cares either. I mention it to make this point. Why lie about something so innocuous? By saying this, it seems that Kavanaugh is not willing to admit even the smallest detail that could compromise the image he wants to sell of a wholesome, upright young student. If a person is willing to lie about anything under oath, this instantly puts the credibility of everything else they've said in jeopardy. That's why it's important that we now look at Kavanaugh's answers to questions regarding his character from the Senate. As Kavanaugh was asked straight questions that should easily have straight answers, Kavanaugh's answers became more and more evasive, absurd, and unbelievable. Let's see how Kavanaugh responded to a question from Senator Leahy.
In your yearbook, you talked about drinking and sexual exploits, did you not?
Senator, let me take a step back and explain high school. I was number one in the class. Freshman.
And I thought only
no.
I thought only the Senate.
You got this up. I'm gonna talk about my high school. No. I'm gonna
let him
talk,
answer.
I'm gonna talk about my high school record. If you're gonna sit here and mock me,
We were. I think we were all very fair to Dr. Ford. Shouldn't we be just as fair to Judge Kavanaugh?
Say.
I busted my butt in academics. I always tried to do the best I could. So I recall I finished one in the class, first and freshman and junior year, right up at the top with Steve Clark and Eddie Ayala. We were always kind of in the mix. I played sports. I was captain of the varsity basketball team. I was wide receiver and defensive back on the football team. I ran track in the spring of '82 to try to get faster. I did my service projects at the school, which involved going to the soup kitchen downtown. Let me finish. And going to tutor intellectually disabled kids at the Rockville Library. Went to church, and yes, we got together with our friends.
Pay attention to how Kavanaugh responded to this question. He was asked about things in his yearbook which described drinking and sexual exploits. Kavanaugh responded by accusing the senator of mocking him and then talked about his academics and charity work. This is absurd. You can be a great student who volunteers at charities while also drinking enough to do stupid things, but there's a reason why Kavanaugh responded in this way. A huge part of Kavanaugh's argument for why he couldn't have done this and that he belongs on the Supreme Court was his character, not only now, but his character as a student then. When we do look at Kavanaugh's yearbook, a very different picture emerges. For example, in Kavanaugh's yearbook, there is a phrase that pops up over and over again, where 12 different boys, including Kavanaugh, refer to themselves as Renate alumni, or members of the Renate Club. Here's a picture with a bunch of boys with Kavanaugh in the left corner, with the caption underneath labeling it Renate alumni. Written next to it, missing President J.C. Del Real. It turns out that J.C. is Juan Carlos Del Real, and on his yearbook page, it's written Renate President. Kavanaugh was asked about what this means. Let's hear what he has to say about it.
One of our good female friends who we would admire and went to dances with had her name used on the yearbook page with the term alumnus. That yearbook reference was clumsily intended to show affection and that she was one of us. But in this circus, the media has interpreted the term as related to sex. It was not related to sex.
Well, of course, Renate alumni and being a member of the Renate Club is just a sign of friendship and platonic affection. It's the liberal media with their dirty liberal minds that just had to go ahead and make it all about sex. Typical liberals. Well, to see what the Renate Club is all about, let's turn to this page of Kavanaugh's yearbook, where someone wrote an affectionate, friendly poem about Renate. You need a date, and it's getting late, so don't hesitate to call Renate. Yes, I'm sure that poem is just talking about good old platonic friendship and affection. Who is this Renate anyway? It turns out that Renate is Renate Dauphine, a person who knew Kavanaugh and his friends when they were in high school, and the New York Times spoke to her to see what she thinks about all this. She says, I learned about these yearbook pages only a few days ago. I don't know what Renate alumnus actually means. I can't begin to comprehend what goes through the minds of 17-year-old boys who write such things, but the insinuation is horrible, hurtful, and simply untrue. I pray their daughters are never treated this way. Okay, so Renate definitely doesn't see it as a sign of affection and friendship, but maybe she's just a liberal who's been brainwashed by the mainstream media into thinking Renate alumnus has something to do with sex. Oh, wait a second, she was actually one of the 65 women who signed a letter testifying to Kavanaugh's good character before she heard about the Renate alumni. Curious. Kavanaugh said that Renate alumni was a sign of affection and to show that she was one of us, but then his lawyer implied it refers to a kiss they once shared. But then Renate had this to say, I think Brett must have confused me with someone else, because I never kissed him. Even if Renate alumnus refers to kissing Renate, presumably Kavanaugh and his friends also kissed girls other than Renate while they were students, right? Why did Renate get singled out? Look, it's obvious to anyone with an objective mind that Kavanaugh and his friends were taunting Renate and calling her easy. Kavanaugh just couldn't bring himself to admit that it was a stupid joke at Renate's expense, and insisted that it was just an innocent way of expressing platonic affection. Even more insultingly, Kavanaugh pretended that it was the Democrats and not he and his schoolmates degrading Renate.
Let me ask you about Renata Dolphin, who lives in Connecticut. She thought these yearbook statements were, quote, horrible, hurtful, and simply untrue, end quote, because Renata alumni clearly implied some boast of sexual conquest. And that's the reason that you apologized to her, correct?
That's false, speaking about the yearbook, and she said she and I never had any sexual interaction. So your question is false, and I've addressed that in the opening statement. And so your question is based on a false premise and really does great harm to her. I don't know why you're bringing this up, frankly. Doing great harm to her by even bringing her name up here is really unfortunate.
Well, calling someone an alumnus in that way,
well, implying what you're implying about
by a number of your football friends at the time as boasting of sexual conquest. That's the reason that I'm bringing it up. And
yeah, no, it's false. You're implying that. Look what you're bringing up right now about her. Look what you're doing.
Chairman, I ask that these interruptions not be subtracted from my time.
Yeah, ask your question and then
She's a great person. She's always been a great person. We never had any sexual interaction. By bringing this up, you're just dragging her through the mud. It's just unnecessary.
Even after everything we've seen, Kavanaugh still expects us to believe that out of all the girls he's friends with, he and his 11 schoolmates just happened to single out Renate because they were extra friendly with just her. Sure. Next, let's take a look at some of the things that shed some light on Kavanaugh's drinking habits. During the course of the Kavanaugh hearings, there were 4 accusations of rape or sexual assault that got attention. I personally only find 2 of them credible, and the common theme between the 2 of these accusations was Kavanaugh committing the sexual assaults while heavily inebriated. That's why Kavanaugh's drinking habits became a topic to consider. Let's hear Senator Klobuchar's questions about it.
We have heard, not under oath, but we have heard your college roommate say that you did drink frequently, these are in news reports, that you would sometimes be belligerent. Another classmate said it's not credible for you to say you didn't have memory lapses. So drinking is one thing.
I actually don't think that's the second quote's correct. On the first quote, if you wanted, I provided some material that's still redacted about the situation with the freshman year roommate. And I don't really want to repeat that in a public hearing, but just so you know, there were 3 people in a room, Dave White, Jamie Roach, and me, and it was a contentious situation where Jamie did not like Dave White at all. And I mean, this.
Okay.
So Dave White came back from home one weekend, and Jamie Roach had moved all his furniture out into the courtyard.
Okay.
And so he walks in, and so that's your source on that. Okay. So there's some old.
Drinking is one thing.
And there's much more. Okay. Look at the redacted portion of what I said. I don't want to repeat that in a public hearing.
I will. Could I just ask one more question?
Redacted information about that.
Okay.
Kind of strange, don't you think? When Kavanaugh was asked about being belligerent, he started talking about some hidden evidence that would make it all make sense, but that he didn't want the public to see this evidence. If the evidence exonerates him, why is it so important to keep it from the public? More importantly, like Klobuchar mentioned, Kavanaugh's former classmates have spoken out about this. Liz Swisher, who was a college friend of Kavanaugh's, said, "Brett was a sloppy drunk, and I know because I drank with him. I watched him drink more than a lot of people. He'd end up slurring his words, stumbling. There's no medical way I can say that he was blacked out, but it's not credible for him to say that he has had no memory lapses in the nights that he drank to excess." Lynn Brooks, who also knew Kavanaugh in college and a Republican, said this on CNN.
"There is no doubt in my mind that while at Yale, he was a big partier, often drank to excess, and there had to be a number of nights where he does not remember. In fact, I was witness to the night that he got tapped into that fraternity, and he was stumbling drunk in a ridiculous costume, saying really dumb things. And I can almost guarantee that there's no way that he remembers that night. And it's unfair that he kept flipping the questions to, but I studied real hard, but I played sports."
Remember that weird answer that Kavanaugh gave about moving furniture? Well, his former roommate also did an interview, and he explains it here.
He referenced an incident where I played a prank on this third guy, where we took the furniture out of his room and set it up in the grass quad outside of our dormitory. And I set it up just like it was in his room and waited for him to return as if I was studying in his room outside. It was a prank. I knew it would be irritating to him, but I thought he would think it was funny. And he didn't. He was very angry when he got back. He went to our common room where there was a keg of beer and filled up a pitcher and poured it on my bed. And I responded and did the same thing back to him. So we weren't close. That was a strained incident, but it never really turned into a fight. And I would say if I had to characterize this third person, we just didn't have any relationship. I didn't hang out with him, but I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about him, and I suspect it was the same for him.
Just so I'm clear, the pouring of the beer on the bed, that was the third roommate, Dave. I believe his name was Dave, or was that Kavanaugh pouring the beer?
Yeah, I don't want to get into naming other people that aren't already dragged into this thing. I assume he has a good reason not to be part of it. But it was a third person who was in our suite. There were more than just the 3 of us in the suite.
Okay.
Brett and I were in a single room together, and there were a series of other people in adjoining rooms. But yeah, it was the third person who poured the beer. And
okay.
I got to tell you, I was trying to figure out why this was redacted. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. But I wonder if maybe the reason was that it forces you to say there was a keg of beer in your room, which in retrospect is not very usual.
Kavanaugh wasn't even involved in the fight between his roommates. He had nothing to hide, unless he was so desperate to portray himself as a straight-edge good student who didn't have a problem with alcohol that he wasn't willing to reveal that he keeps a keg of beer in his room. This is where we begin taking a turn towards the absurd. On Kavanaugh's yearbook page, it's written, 100 kegs or bust. Some might say, well, come on now, how do you know he was talking about alcohol? It could have been kegs of water for all you know. Well, again, we can look to Mark Judge's book for more details. As it turns out, Judge explicitly details the origin and meaning of 100 kegs or bust. From his book, 100 kegs, I said. We're going to drink 100 kegs, then brag about it. How? Shane asked. Denny crumpled up the Saint and tossed it into the pool. A good first step was to have our own paper. The Saint is nothing but a propaganda machine for prep. I sat up. That's it. We could start our own newspaper. We could drink 100 kegs, then brag about it in our own paper. Before I could further the plans for 100 kegs in our own paper, I was distracted by a loud voice cheering behind us. A few pages later, he writes, "It was Sunday morning, and the night before we had polished off keg number 62. However, the keg count had started to take its toll on me. The night before, Shane and Denny had wisely gone home at midnight, but I had stayed up until 3 o'clock drinking. I had reached the point where once I had the first beer, I found it impossible to stop until I was completely annihilated. That first magical cold one seemed to set off a physiological need for more, like a morsel of food offered to a starving man. Once I felt the first lilting rise of a buzz, I had to keep drinking until I could hardly walk." Okay, so we actually do know that the kegs were kegs of beer. That brings us to the next interesting phrase in the yearbook. On Kavanaugh's page, it's written, "Beach Week Ralph Club, biggest contributor." Let's hear Kavanaugh's explanation.
Let's look at Beach Week Ralph Club biggest contributor. What does the word Ralph mean in that?
That probably refers to throwing up. I'm known to have a weak stomach, and I always have. In fact, the last time I was here, you asked me about having ketchup on spaghetti. I always have had a weak stomach.
I don't know that I asked about ketchup on spaghetti, but...
You didn't, someone did.
Okay.
And this is well known. Anyone who's known me, like a lot of these people behind me, have known me my whole life, know, I got a weak stomach, whether it's with beer or with spicy food or anything.
So the vomiting that you reference in the Ralph Club reference related to the consumption of alcohol?
Sarah, I was the top of my class academically, busted my butt in school, captain of the varsity basketball team, got into Yale College. When I got into Yale College, got into Yale Law School, worked my tail off.
So Kavanaugh vomited a lot during Beach Week, more than anyone else, but it had nothing to do with the 100 kegs of beer and it was about spicy food? Nothing to do with the beer that he likes, that he had too much of sometimes and that he still likes? Okay. Now, there were some other words and phrases that people wanted to know the meaning of. They included Devil's Triangle and boofed. During the hearings, lots of people claimed that Devil's Triangle was a sex act and boofing refers to taking drugs or alcohol through your anus. Yes, people actually do that. You can find top urban dictionaries from before the Kavanaugh hearings that say these things. If those things are indeed what Kavanaugh meant by Devil's Triangle and boofing, then this would certainly show that Kavanaugh was lying in his own account of his character. However, there is no way for me to see whether or not these words meant the same things to people in 1983 that they do now, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time arguing over these terms. What is more interesting to me is how it ties into the identity of Bart O. Kavanaugh. Again, in Mark Judge's memoir, there's this interesting passage. From his book, "So, how do you like prep?" Mary asked. "It's cool." "Do you know Bart O. Kavanaugh?" "Yeah, he's around here somewhere. I heard he puked in someone's car the other night." "Yeah, he passed out on his way back from a party." If Bart is just a surname for Brett, this would go against Kavanaugh's testimony of himself as never drinking enough to pass out, or being a responsible drinker, and corroborates Kavanaugh's schoolmates' claims about his drinking habits. But is Bart O. Kavanaugh Brett Kavanaugh? Let's see what Brett has to say about that.
He authored a book titled Wasted, Tales of a Gen X Drunk. He references a Bart O. Kavanaugh vomiting in someone's car during Beach Week and then passing out. Is that you that he's talking about?
Senator, Mark Judge was...
To your knowledge, is that you that he's talking about?
I'll explain if you let me.
Proceed, please.
Mark Judge was a friend of ours in high school who developed a very serious drinking problem, an addiction problem, that lasted decades and was very difficult for him to escape from. And he nearly died. And then he had leukemia as well on top of it. Now, as part of his therapy, or part of his coming to grips with sobriety, he wrote a book that is a fictionalized book and an account. I think he picked out names of friends of ours to throw them in as kind of close to what for characters in the book. So
So
you know,
you
we
don't
can
know
sit
what-
here.
You don't know whether that's you or not.
We can sit here
I know what
and
you're
like
saying.
make fun of some guy who has an addiction.
I'm
but
not making
I don't think
fun
that
of
really
anybody,
makes is
Judge
really
Kavanaugh. I'm
good.
trying to get a straight answer from you under oath. Are you Bart Kavanaugh that he's referring to? Yes or no? That's
You'd have to ask him.
I think we do have reason to believe that Bart O. Kavanaugh is Brett, and here's why. On Brett's yearbook page, the phrase that contains the word boofed is actually directed towards Mark Judge. The full sentence is, Judge, have you boofed yet? The phrase, have you boofed yet, appears only 2 times in the entire yearbook. One is on Brett's page. The other one is on, yep, you guessed it, Mark Judge's page, where it reads, Bart, have you boofed yet? Unless you think that Brett was referring to Judge and then Judge was referring to someone else, and given the fact that Judge refers to a Bart O. Kavanaugh in his book, I find it extremely hard to believe that Bart is anyone other than Brett Kavanaugh. Bart is most likely some sort of inside joke between the two. Because of this, when Judge writes about Bart passing out from drinking and partying too much, I think we have reason to suspect that it's Brett. Again, does any of this definitively prove that Kavanaugh actually sexually assaulted Dr. Ford? No. But let me propose a thought experiment. Let's say that you're interviewing someone for a job. This isn't just any job, but it's a job where the person you hire will regularly make decisions that may affect the lives of millions. You can pick from dozens and dozens of qualified candidates, and after interviewing candidates, you narrow your choice down to a few people. You settle on one of them, but then you get a letter from someone saying that they were sexually assaulted by the candidate a long time ago, so you call him into the office to ask him about it. To support his case, he brings in a calendar from around the time that the assault happened. He reads aloud parts of his calendar, many dates from June and August, and a bunch of stuff from the weekends, but when you look at his calendar, you find there's one date that mostly matches the accuser's description, and that the candidate conveniently skipped over it. Then he tells you that the witnesses there say it never happened, and when you look into it, the witnesses say they just don't remember it, and one of the witnesses actually say that they believe the accuser. Then the candidate tells you that he's always respected women, and that he was a virgin until after college. But then you find out that in his yearbook he refers to himself as an alumnus of a girl named Renee. So he tells you that being a Renee alumnus is just a way of showing affection and saying that she was one of us, and then gets angry at you for your dirty mind making it about sex. Then you find out that tons of boys from the candidate school refer to themselves as Renee alumni, and one of them even wrote a poem about how Renee is an easy date. So then the candidate tells you that Renee alumnus refers to them sharing a kiss once, but then you talk to Renee and she tells you that she's insulted by the phrase and that she and the candidate never kissed. So then you ask the candidate about his drinking habits and he says,
I busted my butt in academics.
Then you ask him if he's ever drank too much and he says,
That's you're asking about, blackout. I don't know. Have you?
Could you answer the question, Judge? That's not happened. Is that your answer?
Yeah, and I'm curious if you have.
I have no drinking problem, Judge.
Yeah, nor do I.
Okay, thank you.
Then his former classmates come out and say that he was actually a belligerent drunk who was barely able to stand sometimes. And when you ask him about this, he says, well, look, there was a situation where it's all redacted and I don't want to make it public, but there's a redacted file, so yeah. Then you read a book written by the candidate's friend. There you find out that he worked at a grocery store near the end of the summer that the alleged assault occurred, and that he was often drunk or hungover while working. And you remember that the accuser told you that she saw him working at a grocery store a few weeks after the assault and that he looked ill. Then you find that he wrote about someone with a very similar name to your candidate and writes about him passing out drunk after a party. And you see in their yearbook that he seems to refer to your candidate using this same nickname. Then you see that on his yearbook page he wrote about taking part in drinking 100 kegs of beer, and then he was the biggest contributor to the Ralph Club. Then he tells you that Ralphing refers to vomiting, but it has nothing to do with the 100 kegs of beer. I swear, it's just, because of spicy food. I have a weak stomach. Then at this point, you remember that you actually have several other candidates waiting in the hallway outside who are just as qualified. Why in the world would you go out of your way to hire the guy in front of you who has constantly been evasive, combative, dishonest, and unbelievable, with answers that sound more like they came out of a Simpsons bit? In a poll, 54% of Republicans said that Kavanaugh should be confirmed even if the allegations are true. what is the explanation for this? For some, getting a conservative Supreme Court justice may be more important than anything, because of the possibility of repealing Roe v. Wade and outlawing abortion. Presumably, if you consider abortion to be murder, then it would be okay to confirm someone who committed a sexual assault if it would prevent murder, but that doesn't explain everything. When Trump had the chance to appoint a new Supreme Court justice, the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society worked together to give him a list of 21 possible candidates. Here's Leonard Leal from the Federalist Society to talk about it.
Is there a leading contender for you?
No, there's not.
Really not?
No, the list is really good.
They're not in order? You're just saying
No. You can throw a dart at that list, and in my view, you'd be fine.
So again, if there are so many good choices for the Supreme Court, why would you stick with Kavanaugh after all that we've learned? You see, for many people, the Kavanaugh controversy was not just a Supreme Court nomination, but a verdict on the Me Too movement and opposition to Trump as a whole. The only reason why you would stick with Kavanaugh is because doing anything else would be seen as a loss. It would be seen as giving in to pressures from Democrats and liberals, and that is far too off-brand for Trump and Republicans to tolerate. Finally, I want to address some claims that have been made about accusations of sexual assault. Primarily, the idea that now with the Me Too movement, women can just accuse any man of sexual assault with no evidence and then ruin their life. Now, I do believe that the possibility of there being false accusations is a real one, and I know there are some crazy people out there who say that you should believe women no matter what. But most of the rhetoric that I see, especially from law enforcement where it matters, is that the standard procedure should be to listen and verify, and as a progressive, this is the stance that I take. To reiterate my point from the beginning, I do not believe Ford and I do not disbelieve her. What I do believe is that Kavanaugh destroyed his own credibility for the reasons that I presented already. The claims of accusations ruining an innocent man's life came up with the Kavanaugh hearings.
Because now you don't just lose your job, you lose your whole reputation. The way information spreads. It's like being able to kill somebody without a shot fired. Not only do you not care about the truth, you don't care that you've created a nuclear holocaust in someone's life.
My family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed.
Wow, so not only did the accusations ruin Kavanaugh's good name, the accusations were a nuclear holocaust. Let's see whose life was really ruined here. Both Kavanaugh and Ford have received death threats from both sides, something that I obviously find intolerable. However, in the middle of his testimony, Kavanaugh said something that I think we should all think about.
But your coordinated and well-funded effort to destroy my good name and destroy my family will not drive me out. The vile threats of violence against my family will not drive me out. You may defeat me in the final vote, but you'll never get me to quit.
Kavanaugh said that even if he gets voted down in the Senate, he'll never quit. There's a reason why he said that. It's because he's right. If Kavanaugh was not confirmed to the Supreme Court, he would have just gone back to a very prestigious and well-paying job in the second highest court in the land, which is also a constitutional court. What this means for Kavanaugh is that he is given protections described in Article 3 of the US Constitution, meaning that he cannot be fired. He can only be removed by being impeached and then removed by the Senate, the same Senate that appointed him to the Supreme Court instead. Kavanaugh was right to be confident, because there was no scenario in which his life was ruined. He either ended up on the Supreme Court or continued with his lifetime appointment to the second highest court after the Supreme Court. Now let's see what Dr. Ford lost. Dr. Ford has had to move at least 4 times because of the constant threats against her. She has not been able to go back to her job as a university professor, and there's no confirmed timeline for when she'll be able to return. Because of people on the right terrorizing her, Dr. Ford has completely lost her way of life and her livelihood. Of course, there are some people who are saying that she did it all for that sweet cash from GoFundMe. There were 2 main GoFundMe fundraisers made for Dr. Ford, for the purposes of paying for her security costs due to all the threats she got. She and her lawyers say that the remainder of the money raised will go to charities that help sexual assault survivors. Honestly, I'm not sure that Ford really needed the help. She was already quite wealthy with very well-paying positions in 2 prestigious universities, so I personally wish that Ford either didn't take the money or was more transparent about how she's using the money. However, the fact that Ford is already wealthy goes against this idea that Ford made up an accusation just for GoFundMe money. Assuming Ford withdrew all of the money that was raised for her in the 2 fundraisers, that would come up to $857,592. Now let's compare that to what Ford would be making if she was still able to work. Dr. Ford is a psychology professor at Palo Alto University and a research psychologist at Stanford University. The salary for a professorship at one of these universities is on average over $200,000 a year. That's not even counting the amount she gets paid for contracting work. Even if we assume that Ford is only paid $200,000 a year, and that Ford lied and kept every penny that was raised for her, that would mean that Ford got a little over 4 years' salary for making up an accusation against Kavanaugh. It's also worth mentioning that Ford has not accepted any of the book deals that she's been offered. Surely a book written by Ford and her experiences would be a bestseller amongst liberals, no? My question to those who think that Dr. Ford completely made up the accusations for GoFundMe money is, do you really think that completely blowing up your life, losing your privacy and security as well as your job is worth just 4 years' salary? So, what is the takeaway of this video? What I want everyone to remember are the distortions and absurd excuses that Kavanaugh told in order to get his precious job. In a regular job interview, acting the way that Kavanaugh did would disqualify you. I want everyone to remember that Kavanaugh thought that we wouldn't notice the July 1st date on his calendar, who thought that saying, "I was a good student" is an answer to whether or not he drank too much, who said that he threw up the most during beach week, but because of spicy food and not the 100 kegs of beer, that nearly a dozen classmates at Yale said that he drank heavily, and then when questioned about it, responded with a story about furniture moving that was redacted that he didn't want the public to hear, possibly because the story involved Brett keeping a keg of beer in his room, and expected us to believe that Renate alumnus was just a sign of friendship and affection when one of the 12 boys who claimed to be a Renate alumnus wrote a poem about how she's an easy date, and then acted like he had no idea whether or not Bart O. Kavanaugh refers to him, even though we see Mark Judge using Bart to clearly refer to Brett. I want everyone to remember that the Republicans in the Senate fought to appoint a person who said all that to the Supreme Court. Then I want everyone to know that stuff like this is why local elections matter. The president gets to make appointments, but only the Senate can confirm them. Our Congress is made up of two houses. One is the House of Representatives, and the other is the Senate. Democrats took back the House in 2018, but did not take back the Senate. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, has been re-elected time and time again, despite being the most unpopular senator in the country, with a 50% disapproval rating in Kentucky. He's up for re-election this year. Maybe vote him out? Hi, thank you for watching. It's great to be back, and you can expect more to come on a much more regular schedule going forward. Now, I'd like to thank my beloved patrons: Finite Difference, Frank Morales, Anthony Ha, Nicholas Ball, Stacy Solano, Akbash Akira, Frankie Harvey, Tangible Dust, Anime Titty Fan, Red Wing, Donio Jamshed, Milk Toast, Elizabeth, John Boy, Sovereign Snake, David Lamb, Jordan Bronstein, Jack King Spooner, I Forgot My Name, Frantic Atlantic, Christian Ticey Nygaard, David Fuller, Sugar and Stan, and Sina. Thank you all so much for your support. If you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon to see what kind of benefits are available to you. Bye bye.